Hi, I think we're going to get started. So I'm David Rigler. I'm a postdoc at Harvard Medical School, and on behalf of the entire organizing committee, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to MIT today for the Advocating for Science Symposium and Workshop 2016. So the organization of this event has been a collaboration between three groups of young scientists. The first of these is Future of Research, which is a group that was actually recently minted as a non-profit, but has arisen from grassroots efforts of young scientists over the past 2 years. The second group, Academics of Future of Science, is another grassroots group arising out of MIT that particularly has interests in how we can advocate for change to better fund the scientific enterprise. And finally, the third group, MIT Graduate Student Council, which represents the interests of graduate students at MIT. So I've had a really exciting time over the past few months sorry, can you hear me there? So I've had a really exciting time over the past few months organizing this event with our co-organizers, particularly Christian Glorioso from AFS and Daniel Curtis from MIT GSC, but also a really large group of really passionate volunteers from all three of our groups. And so during the event, if you do need to know anything, look for people with spots on their name tags, as these people who will actually be able to help you out, hopefully. Also at this stage, I'd really like to extend my thanks to everyone who's been part of this organization effort. So the reason that we've come together today and that our groups came together was a real joint realization about how important it is for all scientists to gain better advocacy skills as we try and progress towards a better scientific research sector and to help to make positive change in that direction. Now, our respective organizations have all spent the past few years really framing and discussing a lot of the issues that face us in the scientific sector, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that in the coming hour from each of our groups. And so we now really wanted to then move towards actual solutions and progression towards solutions to these problems. So our hope for today's event is that during the panel discussion and the keynote speech, which is by a former congressman and the CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Rush Holt, and then after that at our networking reception at Mead Hall, that you can discuss, that we can learn from each other, and that ultimately that we can clarify effective routes that we can all take towards moving and pursuing our own advocacy agendas. So tomorrow we then have participants coming to a more focused workshop portion of the event, which is going to be an advocacy skills boot camp as such, to continue on this theme and progression towards being able to advocate for real solutions. So we've specifically aimed this event to make it somewhat agnostic to your own individual topics of interest that you're passionate about. And so we hope that there are plenty of opportunities for people to put in input from a range of different perspectives and to learn from each other based on that. So as you know, we've tried, if you've been reading your emails at least, we've been trying to collect as much data as we can in the lead up to this from our participants. And so we're very excited about the breadth of the audience that are going to be here at this event today and tomorrow. So I can tell you that participants coming are spanning all of the major institutes in the Boston area, as well as many outside of it. And this includes 6 travel scholarship winners, 5 from around the US and 1 international visitor from the Netherlands. They also span career stages from undergraduates to professors and directors, from academia to industry. And I think what's really most exciting is that in the more extended answer kind of questions that we've been able to look through some of your responses to, we were really excited about how engaged everyone has been and all of the different perspectives that everyone has. And so I'm really excited and inspired by what's going to hopefully come out at this event and how much we can learn from each other. So at this stage, we'd like to say a huge thank you to our generous sponsors, which you can see on the board here and in your programs. In particular, I wanted to say thank you to our two gold sponsors, the MIT Biology Department and the Harvard Med School Department of Systems Biology. And we certainly couldn't have put on this event without their assistance. So just a few basic housekeeping things before I move on. The first is please keep your name tags on throughout the event, as well as when you go to the networking reception at Mead Hall for entry into that. You'll find in your name tag there are 2 drink tickets, which means you can get a drink on us. There's Wi-Fi available on the MIT public Wi-Fi network if you need that. And if you are tweeting for the event, please use the hashtag that is not on that slide, but is in your program, @4Side2016. Also, because we've got a lot of participation, hopefully we'll have a lot of questions, please be courteous to everyone else and make sure that you're not, for instance, hogging the limelight for too long when you ask your questions. So, at this stage, I would now like to pass over to Gary McDowell from Future of Research. Gary has been involved with Future of Research from its beginnings in 2014. At the time, he was a postdoc in Boston. He's been a postdoc at Harvard Med School, Boston Children's Hospital, as well as at Tufts. And recently, Gary shifted his focus to become the executive director of the Future of Research nonprofit, which we began midway through this year. So this includes a residency that he's going through at the moment at Many Labs Open Science Skunkworks in San Francisco. I don't know what a skunkworks is, and neither does Gary, but hopefully he'll be able to tell you about other interesting things during his talk. Thanks, Gary.
All right, thank you, David. It's just the next one. Perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm the Executive Director of Future of Research. I finished with my postdoc days back in mid-May and pretty much straight away shipped out to San Francisco. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of the history of Future of Research and some of the things that we're trying to do now in our advocacy work. So Future of Research really came about in response to this paper. You've maybe all heard of this, the famous Alberts et al. 2014 PNAS paper, which talks about some of the key issues there are with biomedical research right now, things like hypercompetition, problems with funding, the number of people in the system, different kinds of pressures for publication. And so the idea was, with a group that started really coming out from Harvard Med School with Jessica Polka and Kristen Krukenberg really driving the effort and organizing a first conference. The idea was to try and get junior scientists together to talk about these things, and other than just sort of getting together and whinging about it, which is quite a common practice, but to actually try and come up with practical solutions and discuss those kinds of things. So the first meeting we had together was also really facilitated by the formation of what is now the Boston Postdoc Association. Groups of us were getting together from different institutions across the Boston area, starting to try to collaborate and cooperate a bit more. And it was through that the various people involved in Future of Research were able to get to know each other and get that effort going. And the two efforts are now doing very well. So at the meeting, and at various of our meetings, usually we'll have panels, people will sort of give you the information that's going on, the experts in the field who are discussing the sort of problems that we're thinking about. And then we have these breakout workshop sessions where, particularly in the 2014 meeting, people got together to discuss problems and then try to brainstorm solutions, thinking about 4 areas, which included training of junior scientists, funding in science and focus on junior scientists, the metrics and incentives that there are in performing science, and also the structure of the biomedical workforce. How many people there are in each level, is that a problem, is it not? And you can see everyone very happily sharing their post-its there. And what we did from that was we wrote up a white paper, we put all the data from all of the post-its in with this too, and we discussed various of the issues that came up and what people thought about them. And you can find this paper on F1000 Research. And we found three key sort of themes that we keep working on now as well, that we wanted to focus on, that a lot of junior scientists were focusing on. One was investment in junior scientists in terms of funding mechanisms and also salaries. Another was connectivity, and that includes not only connecting amongst postdocs around institutions, around the country, around the world, also connecting between the different levels, so postdocs talking to grad students, talking to faculty, all those levels getting together to talk about the problems we're facing. And the third thing was talking about transparency. So where do people go in this system? We don't track people terribly well. We don't know what careers people end up having with PhDs in many cases. And particularly with postdocs, they're a very poorly tracked part of the biomedical enterprise. So we wanted to see more transparency from various departments, from institutions, on careers, and also things like benefits and salaries, which are very hard to find out about. So we weren't sure what would happen after this, but we were thrilled that in 2015, there were 4 meetings across the country, in New York, Chicago, the Bay Area, San Francisco, and then we had a second meeting here, which was a little bit more focused on labor economics, data collection about our populations, and the sort of things that we want to find out about. This year, obviously, you know, we're at the meeting here now advocating for science, which we've been involved with in partnership with Academics for the Future of Science and MIT's Grad Student Council. And there's also a meeting coming up in November at NYU. It's been a bit quieter this year, mostly because we also set about forming a non-profit because things were going so well and we realized there was so much work to do. And we were actually very lucky to receive some seed funding to start up a non-profit. And so the idea is that we're trying to, through meetings like this, coordinate junior people together, help them to organize these meetings, help them get together to discuss things, and then really try and take a lot of these ideas that are coming out of these meetings and run with them and try and advocate for them and really contribute the voice of junior scientists into a discussion which often they don't have much of a voice in. So this is a key point, that learning how to advocate is very important for getting junior voices heard. I think it's a key part of this meeting. I feel a bit selfish on my part that I'm going to probably learn just as much as anyone else here in trying to go forward with my work. So it's a really great opportunity to be here. Just briefly, I want to discuss what we are advocating for right now, some of the very short-term things. And one is trying to educate, particularly postdocs, about the Fair Labour Standards Act, and also grad students too, who are likely heading to postdoc positions. So if you don't know what this has been a recent change to an act that controls sort of minimum wages and overtime levels. And there's a lot of information, misinformation, and opinions flying around now about this. What was very interesting was that there was a push to have postdocs exempted from this rule in the same way that medical residents are. But that was not successful. And in fact, the Secretary of Labour, Thomas Perez, wrote a blog post with Francis Collins, director of the NIH, day after the ruling came out, explicitly talking about postdocs and their role and why they thought this should apply. Key points that come up: the only postdocs that would be exempt from this are those who are in primarily teaching roles, that is their primary role. So this also means that adjunct faculty who are primarily teaching are excluded from this ruling. But a key thing that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is that everyone who's a postdoc in the US who's not primarily teaching is coming under this ruling. No matter what visa you're on, no matter what fellowship you're on, absolutely everyone is affected by this. So I gave a talk at Tufts yesterday. I don't want to sort of get into this again, but the slides are up at F1000 Research, and the talk is also up on WebEx. Tufts very kindly recorded it for me. I will be tweeting these out later on with the hashtag on, so you can go and see those. But basically, the thesis is that I don't think that any institutions are actually really going to track hours. I think everyone's salary is going to be raised. And so you can see if you agree with me or not through the slides, but I sort of lay out a lot of the things I think about there. Sort of tied in with that, we're also working with the American Society of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology to figure out how to reform postdoc administration. It's a pretty dull point, but a lot of postdocs are administered in a very piecemeal fashion in institutions, and this leads to a lot of problems in actually tracking them, dealing with benefits, HR issues, and so the FLSA has actually really helped us with this because it's a perfect time for institutions to reform how they're administering postdocs, because they'll also need to show that they're complying with federal labor laws. And so at the moment, the National Postdoc Association has gathered that there are 37 different titles for what essentially is a postdoc being used across the US. So at the moment, we're working together with ASB&B and other partners to come up with a plan, issue a white paper on this, assist institutions with implementation. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Some institutions have already done this and done it successfully. And so we are going to try and reach out to postdoctoral community across the nation to try and get their help with that and make sure that they're involved in this process. And then sort of a larger thing going forward is looking at this issue of transparency, career outcomes. What are PhDs and postdocs getting from their training? Where are they ending up? Are they getting useful training experiences? Are they actually being trained? And so, a lot of debate is going around the FLSA at the moment. Will this lead to fewer postdocs? This is a schematic that you may have seen before. It's pretty famous. It's by Future Research's president, Jessica Polka. And it sort of shows the flux that we can tell at the moment through the system of graduate students, postdocs, who seems to be ending up where, based on the data that we have, which has a lot of caveats to it, but it's the data that we're working from. And so this is something that we're really trying to think about actively. Are there too many people at certain levels? Where should people be going? What is useful for a scientific enterprise? And that's really sort of our big direction, is that at the moment there's a feeling that a lot of grad students, postdocs, and junior scientists are directed towards academic pursuits, and anyone who leaves academia is then deemed by the culture a failed scientist. And so we're trying to figure out how can we better imagine a scientific enterprise, people using their scientific passion in all different kinds of ways to benefit society, rather than just benefiting an academic system, which I think will tie in nicely with what Kristen is about to talk to you about. So I just want to say thank you. We are getting our major funding from the Open Philanthropy Project based out in the Bay Area. I'm supported in many labs by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, also a co-PI and an NSF grant that's just started, and ASB&B has given a lot of help as well in setting things up. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm now going to call Kristen Glorioso, who is a postdoc in the MIT Biology Department and is also one of the founders of AFS, to talk about what they've been doing over the last few years in terms of understanding how science research enterprise is funded and how we should be funding it, and also to give a little bit more background in terms of how lobbying sort of is structured, and so that hopefully as a sort of introduction to the panel that will come after. So, Kristen.
Great. So, hello everyone, I'm Kristen. I'm a postdoc in the biology department, and as David said, one of the founders of Academics for the Future of Science. And I'd like to start by thanking the Future of Research and also MIT's Graduate Student Council for creating this with us. It's been great. It's been a really great collaboration, so we really appreciate that. So, all right. That apparently was not the right way to change the slide. Okay, so Academics for the Future of Science is a group, it's a nonpartisan science advocacy community hosted by students and postdocs here at MIT. And we've been around for about a year, but we've been doing research on this for about 3 years. And the reason that we started this organization was because there's an atmosphere of pessimism around academic science in terms of people envisioning a future and being able to move forward. Even here at MIT and at places like Harvard, there's trouble getting grants, and really there's this question about what the future of academia is going to be like. So we got together, and particularly we were focused on issues of funding, so people not being able to get grants, really talented people losing their jobs or not being able to survive as junior faculty members. So there's a lot of issues facing scientists, so these are just a few that we're interested in. Shrinking and unstable funding, more PhD-trained scientists than academic jobs, opaque science communication to the public and to lawmakers, peer review problems, increasing postdoc lengths and quality of life issues, graduate student quality of life issues, and there's been a lot going on recently in terms of these things. AFS in particular has been mostly focused on the shrinking and unstable funding as an issue, but we're interested in all of these things. So I'm going to tell you a few things that we've been doing in this arena. So, but before we could really tackle what to do about the shrinking funding, we had to kind of understand what was going on. So you can see that research and development funding in this country as a percentage of the total federal budget has been steadily declining since the 1970s. And we're pretty much at a low point now. And that's really a measure of how much science is important to a country, is how much they're willing to invest in it. So this is pretty concerning. And actually, young investigators are the most underfunded. So you can see that the number of investigators that have an R01 that are age 36 and younger is declining, whereas older PIs are getting more of the R01 grants. And that's probably for a variety of reasons, but really the young people are being hit the hardest by this. So to understand that, we wanted to really take a look at the budget and ask, why is this happening? Why are we getting decreasing funding levels? And to do that, you kind of have to understand how the budget works. So the federal budget is divided broadly into two categories: mandatory spending, which money has to be spent on every year at a set level, and discretionary funding, which is funding that can be allocated by a process called appropriations. So almost all of science funding is in the discretionary category, which means every year it gets decided by a series of appropriation bills. So research and development is actually a pretty small part of the budget, around 3.5%. So even small increases in this percentage would make a huge difference to scientists. So we saw that, I had one more comment about that. So we know that as Medicare and Medicaid expand in the mandatory category, there's shrinking money for discretionary funding overall. And science is losing out in terms of where the money goes. So we're not having a loud enough voice to advocate for science for this shrinking pool of discretionary funds, especially after the sequester, which capped across the board discretionary funding for science. Okay, so the next thing we wanted to ask were all there are alternative sources of income we could use for science. And so this is just an infographic that shows you the size of the NIH and SF budget and compares it to possible alternative sources. So contributions from the Gates Foundation, for example, or from industry, or from Kickstarter for the entire life of Kickstarter, or NPR per year. And what you can see is that these sources are just dwarfed by the size of the NIH and SF budget, so really aren't viable solutions. So originally we're thinking, maybe we can crowdfund science, for example. And you can see that even if we were as successful as NPR in crowdfunding, it would only be $200 per lab per year, which is tiny. So it really seemed like getting the government to increase funding for science and to really make it a priority in this country was going to be the only viable solution to this problem. Okay, so how do we do that? So there are a lot of ways to advocate. And I think all of these are kind of viable ways to advocate. So traditionally, we've gone through universities or organizations like AAAS or MIT's Washington office to lobby for science funding. But you could also go through the media. You could try and talk directly to the public and have them influence the government. So all of these sort of pathways are viable. I'm going to tell you about the ones in orange, which are a couple strategies that we used. So the first one is writing an article that talks to the media and using that to give voice to your concerns. And the second one is actually talking to the government yourself as a scientist or encouraging the public to talk to the government through email writing. Okay, so in May we published this article, oops, wrong button, in eLife, Avoiding a Lost Generation of Scientists. And many of these images you're seeing on infographics are actually part of this article. So we originally, being mostly scientists, created all this data. We had this 17-page document with outlining, all of these things. And when we were talking to some of our advisors, they were telling us, well, that's great. This is, data is the currency of scientists. This is how we talk to each other. This is how we convince each other of things. But really, it's stories that are the currency of policymakers. So if you want to, convince policymakers that there's a problem, you really need to tell personal stories, which was kind of counterintuitive to us. But that's exactly what we ended up doing. We interviewed three of our colleagues that were having funding issues, really bright, talented people at great universities that had published really well, that had left academia or were in the process of leaving academia because of funding problems. And we gave voice to their stories in this article, as well as having the infographic that had the data, because we had to have the data there somewhere. And this actually ended up being a really successful way to advocate, because when the new postdoc legislation came down that Gary was telling you about, the labor law, we actually got a shout out to our article. So Dr. Mike Lauer, the Deputy Director of NIH Extramural Research, he said, stakeholders ranging from academic faculty to scientific professional societies have recommended further increases in postdoctoral compensation, and early career researchers have likewise been vocal about the types of challenges postdocs face in the current research ecosystem. And that last bit linked to our article. So really what we were saying was being heard by the NIH and used as fodder to do things like the postdoc labor law. So we think that this is a really, actually a very effective way to get a message across, is in publications like this. Okay, so the second thing I'm going to talk to you about is our email writing campaign. So going through the public to reach the government. Okay, so email writing campaign. So we were thinking about the email writing campaign, and we were thinking about why people would or would not write an email. And really there's a bunch of barriers to advocacy. So, and even for myself, because I get emails from Society for Neuroscience asking me to send an email about this thing or that thing, and what goes through my head is, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and is it going to be easy? Is it going to take me a lot of time? And does it really matter? So in what I'm doing actually, is it going to make a difference, or am I one of thousands of emails sent that are going to go in the trash at some legislator's office? So I'm going to start there. So does it actually matter? The answer is yes, it very much matters. So we've talked to Senator Warren's office, and we've talked to MIT Washington and to other lobbyists and said, okay, how does this actually work? When you send an email to your legislator, what happens? So it turns out that when you send an email to your representative, someone is in charge of collecting all those emails. And they do it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And it depends on the office a little bit. It's a little bit variable, but they will collect them, and then some staffer will make a list of all the emails received, what the topic was, how many, were they personal, were they form emails, and then that gets sent to Senator Warren, for example. So when they do that, because so few people actually contact their representatives about things, they then take whatever form of contact and multiply it by a number. And so, you know, if you send a form email, for example, maybe you count as 10 constituent voices. If you send a personal email, maybe you count as 50. If you actually pick up the phone and call them, it's like 1,000 voices. And if you show up and have a face-to-face meeting, it's incredibly effective. So this is interesting. Even if you only have, you know, 100 emails sent to a representative, if it's all sent in the same week, and especially if it's personal, this can have this huge impact, because then that representative thinks, this is a voting issue. This is my constituent, and, you know, enough people are taking time out of their day to write me a personal email about this. This is going to matter when I get elected. So it does matter. So who do I send it to? Your representatives, and when. So we thought a lot about the when part. When do you send this? So we really wanted to advocate for science funding. So we first had to figure out how the budget actually works, which is kind of complicated. So in a nutshell, in this infographic, the budget really starts in January when the president starts thinking about what his budget recommendations are going to be, his or her, and then releases that mock-up of the budget. Then the House and the Senate separately, through 12 appropriations processes, figure out how much money they want to allocate to each thing in the discretionary funds. And so science is kind of scattered throughout all of those 12 appropriations bills. So then September 30th is the budget deadline. So that's when, in theory, the House and the Senate are supposed to get together and decide on a final numbers for all of these things. In practice, that doesn't usually happen. What happens is some alternative things. Either there's a continuing resolution that happens, and they buy themselves more time, usually till December, and then put together an omnibus spending package, which is like a compilation of all these things. Or what happened a couple years ago, and it's terrible for science, is that there's a government shutdown. And when the government shuts down, of course, you can't apply for grants, NIH shuts down, the clinical trials shut down, all of these really awful things happen. So those are the possibilities. So when we thought about when to write emails, we decided there were 2 times that were really key for writing emails. The first time is around February, when they're first starting to think about what they want to put in appropriations bills. So, you know, how much to allocate to various science agencies. And the second time is actually now, because we want to encourage them not to shut down the government, to pass a continuing resolution, to fund science at the highest possible level that they're able to. Okay, so the next thing is how and what to say. So in order to address this, we created this email tool. Actually, we had a couple of really talented MIT undergrads create this email tool for us. And it's really simple. It takes 30 seconds. You just put in a couple pieces of information. It finds your representatives. We have a pre-filled email that you can edit. So we're trying to make it really easy for people to do this. So last year, and we also created this map, which our undergrads created this map, which updates in real time with the numbers of emails sent. So we felt like this was also important. So if you want to know, you know, how many people are sending emails, does your voice really count? Like, you can go to your state and say, okay, if our goal is 100 emails per state, you know, I just had the 99th email sent in this state. And so it's really like feedback for people to know that what they're doing matters. And this is the results of our pilot campaign last year. And I just highlighted the states where we had more than 20 emails sent. So we managed to reach 39 states. and send over 1,000 emails, which was really good because we were brand new and had only been around for about a month at that point. And the most emails were sent in Massachusetts, not surprisingly, followed by Pennsylvania, which is where I did graduate school. So, like, kind of word of mouth and, like, you know, networking through the people you know ends up being the most effective way to get this out. But we managed to reach a lot of states just through Facebook, through Twitter, through social media, through people telling their friends to do this. So, so this was the results of last year's science funding. So I'm just showing you since 2012. And what you can see is that, so 2012 is when the sequester happened and discretionary funds were capped. And you can see that there's been just sort of flat or dropping in science funding ever since then, except for last year we got this small uptick, which was almost put us back to 2012 science funding levels. So that was pretty encouraging for last year, although there's still a long ways to go. All right, so what's going on this year? So right now we're right before the September 30th deadline for the budget. And this is what we're looking at. This is inflation-adjusted numbers for total R&D in the House and Senate. And you can see in the House it's essentially flat. In the Senate there's a small increase that's being proposed. And if you take a little closer look at this, it's actually driven by the NIH, the small increase. So the NIH is about to get a lot more funds, but NSF and NASA and other organizations are going to see a drop in science funding, most likely. Okay, so I just want to encourage everyone to become an advocate. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir in this room, but things you can do is, you know, we have an email campaign running right now. Like, please take 30 seconds to send in a form email, or if you have the time to personalize it, that makes it more effective, at save-science.org. You can also join our community online and talk to us on Facebook and our blog. So this is some of our information. You can like us, follow us, tweet at us. And also contact us directly to blog, help create online tools, write articles, and more. We're really open to suggestions, and we welcome all of you. So, thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. So I finally would like to welcome Daniel Curtis, who's a PhD student here at MIT in the Nuclear Science and Engineering Department. And currently he serves as the External Affairs Chair for the MIT Graduate Student Council. So he's going to talk a little bit about what the GSC is doing here, and then progress through to the panel session.
All right, thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Daniel Curtis, PhD student in nuclear engineering and external affairs chair for the Graduate Student Council. I'm very excited to see so many folks join us. On behalf of MIT and on behalf of the Graduate Student Council, I want to welcome you to the Friday evening portion of the Advocating for Science Symposium. The Graduate Student Council represents the interests of all MIT graduate students in all aspects of their quality of life and work here at MIT, including both our interests in the way MIT works, engaging with the administration, and our interests in government and policy decisions at all levels. So we connect routinely with policymakers on all levels, from City Hall to Capitol Hill, to work to bend the needle toward policy decisions that support a strong and diverse talent pipeline to train the next generation of junior scientists. And that's why we're very proud to be part of the team this year for the Advocating for Science Symposium. In particular, we fight for more efficient handling of student visas and a direct pathway for the world's best and brightest to stay and work in the US after they complete their degree. We fight for open access to the results of federally funded research, and we fight for strong, sustained, real growth in federal funding for basic research. As Kristen just said, this is vitally important to everything we do, and it's a fight we have to go fight again every single year. So we've actually got a couple of minutes. Surprisingly, we are ahead of schedule at this point in the evening. So we will be starting our panel at 5 p.m. At this point, I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break. feel free to talk amongst yourselves, take a look at some of the material we have out in the lobby, and let's plan to be back here a few minutes before 5 p.m. Again, welcome, and thank you all for being here, everybody.